Welcome into a brand new Patriots Hub podcast. Alex Barth, Matt Dolloff coming to you on what was a busy Wednesday after Patriots roster cuts. We had the initial roster. We had waiver claims. We had the practice squad. So a lot to break down, Dolph. I'm glad we didn't do the pod yesterday. We almost did one yesterday after the initial roster. We would have spent probably 30 minutes talking about 8 wide receivers, only for that to, gone, in about a little more than 12 hours. Call it like 16-hour window. But I think we have a better look now. There still might be some tweaking and rounding out the edges, some tinkering here and there between now and week one. But I think we have a better idea of what the Patriots are working with going into their first game against the Raiders. Matt has a recap of the roster up on 985thesportshub.com for those at home that want to play along. You could just pull it up, I guess, on Our Lads or ESPN, but throw us the page view. Why not? Your initial thoughts on the initial-ish, as it stands right now, 24 hours later, initial-ish Patriots roster.
Yeah, no, I was itching to do a podcast, right after the roster came out, Barthy, just because of the on-demand, instant nature of like people wanting to hear people's thoughts on it. But I guess, we had enough of that on 98.5 The Sports Hub. Duggar and Maz reacting live to not just the actual roster, but the erroneous roster that the Patriots posted a little early. Apologies to the team for bringing it up, but everybody saw that. But yeah, no, we said that knowing that the initial 53 is not going to be the week one roster by any means. Might not even be the same roster 24 hours from now. And then here we are, they make their claims, they make their practice squad, other guys get released, and so we knew extra moves were coming, so it was probably wise to wait it out, and people probably want to get your thoughts on it, anyway, even though it's almost a day later. But, technically we're talking about a different Patriots team than we were talking about yesterday. And I look at the roster as, I'm not sure the exact right word, Barthy, but the word I'm thinking is imbalanced, because I do think they're strong in certain areas, but I think they're pretty thin, weak, lack of depth in other areas. Like cornerback, assuming everyone's healthy, I know Christian Gonzalez wasn't a participant in practice today, but, assuming he's back next week, practicing, ready for week one, Carlton Davis is out there healthy. You got the full group, really good cornerback group, right? It's arguably the best group on the teams in terms of talent and depth and, versatility and all that. So they're strong there. I think they're strong up front on defense with their edge rushers. Harold Landry and Caleb Chase both had really good, consistent summers. Milton Williams, Christian Barmore, hopefully they are a dynamic duo in the middle there. And so up front on defense, I think they're really good. Then you look at other positions on the roster, and it starts to get a little more thin. Inside linebacker, what are they really going to have after Robert Spillane? Quarterback, Drake May, you hope he's good, but hopefully if he gets injured, you got to hope that Josh Dobbs looks a lot better than he did in the summer. And they just got their third quarterback. They just got their third quarterback today.
We'll get to him.
We're not sure what's going to happen after Drake May at that spot, and hopefully we don't have to worry about it. Wide receiver, we could have talked about the 8 wide receivers for a half hour yesterday, but as we were sort of expecting, that didn't really hold. And so, Look, I think they have potentially a good number one receiver in Stephon Diggs, but how much the other guy's going to produce after him? I think that's a fair question for the group, even though they had sort of a deep group of NFL caliber players at that spot. But I just think you look at this team and they do have their strengths, but they do have their spots where they're curiously thin, weak, and you just got to hope to God that they can stay as healthy as possible at some of these spots, because if they start to deal with attrition, the depth isn't there. And I think that's sort of part of the fact that they have to rebuild from just a really bad few years of drafts where barely any guys are even left over. And so assuming health, they're going to be really strong in certain areas, but really weak in others. And I think, assuming they get good enough quarterback play and they're as well coached as we think, it's all going to come out as, a mediocre team. So I'm still looking at them as an 8-win team. I think this is an 8-win roster, but I think it's based on not necessarily being well balanced throughout the roster, but by being strong in certain areas and not so strong in other areas.
It kind of goes along with my take, which is again about the depth. It's really impressive how much they overturned this thing, whether or not the players and when I say that, really impressive, just the sheer number, right? We'll see how many of these new moves ultimately work out or not, but you're usually at 41, 42% from week 18, the previous season, in week 1 is very significant turnover. They're closer to 50. I believe they're at 25 players with their 2 waiver claims today. 25 players on the week 1 roster who were not on the team last year. That's more than you realistically can ask for. So, some people may be wondering why there are some holdovers in certain spots. I think some of that was depth. Certainly Kyle Duggar, who I think if somebody had wowed them, they would have traded, but they were also kind of thin at safety. So keeping him sort of makes sense. Not keeping Braden Swinson, which we can get into. Yeah, you want to keep Anthony Jennings. Again, the number's getting a little thin there. Keeping Caden Wallace, it was probably him or Cole Strange for that last spot. They were going to move on from a top 100 draft pick. I think with Strange, given what Ben Brown does, there was more overlap there for him versus Wallace. And I think it was just time for both sides to go their separate ways. But even keeping Caden Wallace, a guy some people had, on the bubble, you had to keep him for the depth. So I don't know how much more they really could have turned this thing over. We want to debate whether the players they signed and drafted were the right ones or not. We can do that. In terms of starting fresh and getting going on getting a new roster in place, they certainly checked that box. And I think they checked it with an exclamation point. When you look at just the number of players, the outright number of players they moved on from, obviously we saw some of that during the offseason, moving on from cornerstones like David Andrews, Jawan Bentley, Joe Cardona, right? And again, we can argue, was that the right move or not? But if the goal was, hey, this team needs to look different, it needs to look new, we need new faces in here, we need to hit reset on the roster and on the culture, I don't know how you can say they haven't done that. We'll see whether or not it works again. But they've certainly done that.
Right. I mean, I'm just sorry. I should have done this before the pod, but I was taking a quick look at the roster myself, and I'm counting 25 holdovers.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about more than 50% of the roster is
25 holdovers. I thought so I counted backwards then. I had 25 new players, but you might be right. Either way, it's about right. It's right around 50%, which is insane.
You're right about half and half, and a lot of the new guys are starting. Milton Williams, Harold Landry, Carlton Davis, and Will
Spillane,
Campbell,
Moses,
the rookies,
rookies,
Moses, Spillane, Jared Wilson looks like he's going to start. All draft picks and free agent
Craig Woodson might start.
It's going to be a majority of the main guys that we see on the field for most of these games, which is I think that's very notable. But I think it also speaks to this is probably going to be a years-long process as far as building back up the talent and the depth and being able to compete with the better teams in the AFC. And I think that goes all the way back, Barth, to Mike Vrabel's first press conference, and I think you wrote about it on 985thesportshub.com. We got to take advantage of bad football. And so I think that's sort of the foundation that Vrabel is laying this year, where can they be just well coached enough where they limit their own mistakes, if not eliminate them entirely. The other team trips all over themselves, and they just take advantage of that. They get an interception, they get turnovers from a bad quarterback, and they take advantage of blown coverages and bad a lack of a pass rush or whatever on this. They just take advantage of that stuff, and they grind out enough wins that way, because that's still, even with all their spending and all the new faces and all, they're still going to have to grind games out like that. And they're going to do it with half the starting roster being holdovers, and the guy I'm probably looking at the most is Drake May in terms of limiting the mistakes. He's the big question mark in terms of limiting mistakes and taking advantage of bad football. I think Mike Vrabel's guys are going to be good at that. Can Drake May sort of follow suit there? I think that's a fair question. But you're looking at basically half the roster, new guys and starting and playing big roles, and so it's year one of a years-long process, but you just hope that they get back to that, at least that average level of being able to beat the bad teams. And I think that's what Vrabel's hoping to do with all the new guys that he brought in that are his guys.
So I'll let you, I know you have a little bit of victory lap. The two guys who were the most on the bubble, Kyle Duggar, Anthony Jennings, both make the team. It had been trending that way, it felt like, over the last week. I'm glad Jennings made it, ultimately. I think he's a good player. I think they'll find a role for him. Duggar, we'll see. I wonder maybe what the trade would have been if they could have moved him. It sounds like that might have been a money issue. that's what you thought would happen. Do you like that they kept both those guys? Would you have rather seen them move one of them, especially if there wasn't much of a market for Duggar? How do you feel about how all that played out?
Yeah, no, I'm glad they kept both, particularly Jennings. I didn't see Jennings as a guy that had to go. I know that Vrabel is trying to flush out the holdovers as much as he could. But Jennings feels like, other than Harold Landry, feels like their best bet as an edge setter at linebacker, playing on the edge there. I feel like he is a guy that you want to put in there in obvious running situations on the opposite side of Harold Landry to set the edge. I think that's their best option right now. Now, that might mean late in a game that they're losing and the other team's trying to eat the clock. You see Anthony Jennings trying to set the edge and make them, grind out run plays there. But even early in games when teams, if they know the opponent's trying to establish the run, I feel like Jennings is a guy that makes sense to put out there over a guy like K'Lavon Chaisson, who I know had a great summer and looks like he could be a good pass rusher for them this year. I still think Jennings was a good guy to have in those run situations. And I do think his, sort of play demeanor and his physicality, his intensity, I think all that sort of does make him a good fit for Mike Vrabel and the defense and the culture and all that. Same thing as sort of a guy like Jabril Peppers, which I thought why Jennings made sense as a guy that should say. So I like that they kept him. Duggar, I would have been fine if they found a trade partner for him, but it just became more and more obvious as camp went on. If you can't trade him, then you might as well keep him. You got to pay him anyway. Unless I know you brought up what if he causes a problem behind the scenes. Duggar never struck me as a guy that would do something like that. I feel like he's more of a team guy than someone who might not handle that well if they tell him they're going to have a diminished role, despite the money that they make. But I think Duggar can still be really good as a box safety, playing around the line of scrimmage, flying around, making open field tackles. Another run game player, another asset against the run as a safety. I think he could definitely still be really good at that. He's just never been great in coverage. And then if you factor in the high ankle sprain and the fact that he's coming back from that, and maybe he's lost a little bit of a step, if he's not quite at the same level of speed that he could be at, then he's probably going to be even, more shaky in coverage than he was already. So I do think he's a guy that you're not necessarily going to want him on the field in coverage, but I think he can still be really good in that sort of box safety role. And so that's why I was okay with them keeping him. And I didn't see a reason to really cut him. So I'm glad he stuck around, and I think he's still one of their 53 best players, even if he's strictly a box safety. I'm happy they kept both those guys.
And I'll just add on Duggar. You mentioned the injury. I thought it was interesting. Mike Vrabel was asked about, why is Duggar a good fit on the roster? And he said, because I think he's feeling better. And I thought he had some good snaps against New York, blah, blah, is the rest of the answer. But because I think he's feeling better implies that he was not 100% at some point, potentially even in the summer. So getting healthier will help, because he looked half a step slow. That's what it all boiled down to. He looked half a step slow. If that was at least in part due to injury, maybe they know they're going to get a better version of Kyle Duggar during the season than they got in the summer. The one other guy that got cut, and this was after the initial roster, that was Kendrick Bourne. If you'll allow me to just sort of wax poetic about Kendrick Bourne for a minute. So first off, what I think happened, what's essentially been reported that happened with that, some people were wondering why he made the roster just get cut, a few hours later. It sounded like Patriots trying to trade him specifically to the Vikings. And I believe Callahan reported that much. Vikings go out, they trade for Adam Thielen this morning. Okay, so that trade's dead. No other trades. Now you cut him. They never planned on keeping him, but wanted to keep him past the deadline, try to get a deal done. I don't know why they couldn't get a deal done. Thielen didn't go for that much. Now, he had a good year last year for his age, but between Minnesota, between San Francisco, could you have found a team to give you a conditional seventh? Maybe whatever team it was wanted to pick swap, and the Patriots didn't view that as the move they wanted to make. They wanted to do net a draft pick. But ultimately, Kendrick Bourne gets released. I've said my piece on Kendrick Bourne quite a few times on this show and other shows. I know I'm a little bit on an island like this, but I'll say it one more time for the time being. Kendrick Bourne is one of the bigger missed opportunities, missed potentials the Patriots have had, especially as long as I've been covering the team. Came here in 2021, got off to an outstanding start, was on a 1,000-yard pace, gets COVID late in the year, and that kind of halted his momentum. Comes back to next year, all right, time to build on it, good things to come. He ends up in the doghouse over things he should not have been in the doghouse for, in a dysfunctional offense, and it just becomes a lost season. Comes back in 2023. Okay, Can they, the dysfunction is gone. Bill O'Brien's back, real offensive coordinator. What's going to happen? Those first 8 games he played, he was on an 80 catch, 900 yard, 8 touchdown pace. That's not all pro numbers, but that's pretty good. I'd take a 900 yard season from a receiver on this team at this point. Take an 8 touchdown season. I think the leader last year had 3. So gets off to a pretty good start. Tears his ACL. Misses the second half of the year. Misses the beginning of last year. And just isn't the same coming off that knee. And at this point, like even I can admit, and I've probably been Kendrick Bourne's biggest defender, 30 years old, off a torn ACL, trying to chase a 12-game stretch that happened 4 years ago is too much at this point. Like it was time to move on. I get it. Loved his approach, loved his mental makeup, loved the way he handled himself when it wasn't always easy. I said it before, I'll say it again. A guy like Kendrick Bourne, I will find a spot on my team for that guy every day. I don't know how much he'll play, but I want a guy like that mentally in my locker room on my roster. It just was probably too little too late at this point. So I'll always be disappointed that we never got to see what Kendrick Bourne could have been in New England in a more functional setting. Whether that had been with Brady, I think he would have been awesome with Brady. Whether that had just been if the offense had worked more and carried over more in 22, or if he doesn't get hurt in 23, what could have been. So I know people will say that I get too worked up over Kendrick Bourne. I admit I'm higher than most. A lot of this is potential as opposed to what we actually saw. But when he was given the opportunity, he produced. And he produced like a solid, number 2 NFL receiver. I don't think he was the number 1. But again, 1,000-yard pace in 21, 900-yard pace in 23, got sick, and then got hurt. So sucks the era's over. It was probably the right time for it to end. I can admit that. But more of a what if to me than probably what other people consider the Kendrick Bourne era. And I wish him well. And I'm sure he'll do well in San Francisco or whatever. I wish him well. But sucks to see that era come to an end for me. Yeah,
no, I mean, he was definitely like a good guy, good teammate.
Yeah.
And I think like you add up the on-field production with the off-field, what he is as a guy and a teammate, like he's the kind of guy you want on a winning team, right? Like I just didn't think he was never really a fit. He was never a fit for a crappy team because he was so upbeat and always had such a positive attitude, which we appreciated with all these the crap we've had to sit through with this Patriots team over the last few years. For him to consistently have to be positive and upbeat, that sort of guy. Like I think he is a better fit for a team like the Vikings or to go back to the 49ers, who are probably expecting to get back to playoff contention this season. I'm not saying the Patriots aren't going to be in playoff contention this year, but I feel like they're going to be, mediocre. And obviously the last few years they were bad. And so they were almost to your point, like they were basically wasting Kendrick Bourne. And then obviously the torn ACL a couple of years ago, I think pre-torn ACL, he looked like that. I remember going back to that year, he was like pretty much their only consistent viable option in the passing game that year. And I even go back to 2021, that game against the Cowboys, which they ultimately lost in overtime, but Bourne had a big touchdown late in the game. Like he felt like a guy that they could build, toward the next era of the Patriots offense, with him being a complimentary receiver on the field, like not a number 1, probably not a number 2 either, but a complimentary guy who could produce and be a sort of a possession receiver, maybe come up big in big moments like he did in that Dallas game a few years ago. But it did, he had the injuries. He was in the doghouse, like you said. But like I feel like a lot of the things that were sort of problems for him weren't necessarily his fault. Like maybe he had issues at times picking up the offenses that he was in, but that also speaks to a team that was sort of changing the offense every year. Maybe he had a chance to sort of get back on the beam with McDaniels back here, but then he gets injured again this year. And so, yeah, he's had a lot of ups and downs and had to deal with a lot of different things with injuries and things like that. He was a solid player when he was on the field and healthy and all that. It's just feels like it all goes back to the same thing we were just talking about with Vrabel sort of turning the roster over. New era. They brought in Stephon Diggs. Kayshon Boutte rose up to a starting role last year over Bourne. Demario Douglas looked like arguably their best receiver consistently throughout camp this year. So that's your top 3. And then you got Kyle Williams obviously making the team as a rookie 3rd-round pick. Mac Hollins was heavily involved and feels like he's building a rapport with Drake May. And so you got 5 receivers there. And that's why I was pretty much saying all along, I don't see much room for Kendrick Bourne. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they moved on. Maybe I got a little lucky in terms of my take there with the Bourne getting hurt. And I think like the trade stuff was probably a financial thing. Like they probably didn't want to have to eat any of the remaining contract. And like the teams were sort of disputing with them about that. And that's why the trades fell apart. But I don't know. I would have taken something instead of just releasing Bourne.
I'm with you.
But yeah, like it does signify a whole new era at that particular position for the Patriots, and you got to hope that the needle's finally pointing up for them because it hasn't been good at that position outside of Bourne in a few years.
Yeah, and let me be clear before people get the pitchforks, because I know there's some Patriots fans that really don't like Kendrick Bourne. I'm not saying they made the wrong move. I would have rather traded him. If there was a trade on the table, I would have tried to push that across instead of cutting him, but it was time to go their separate ways. Last notable cut, or two more notable cuts before we get to the moves they made today. Cole Strange, we already kind of touched on. I don't know if you have any more thoughts, just as a guy that the writing was on the wall. It looked like it was time to go the separate ways. And then Braden Swinson, the 5th round pick, who is back on the practice squad. You know, looking back at that one, if we're going off the production this summer, I get it. He did not have a productive summer. I kind of figured they'd keep him on the potential. Just, all right, let's keep working with this guy. We invested in him, and you can do that from the practice squad. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I think the kicker surprised some people. It had looked like Borregales was the starter for 2 weeks. I know Romo's numbers were better on field goals. I think some of it, and I wrote about this on 985sportshub.com, Borregales was better on kickoffs. That is a factor here. And it sounds like Romo's gone. Like he's not coming back on the practice squad. Mike Vrabel said today, I wish him well. Usually not saying that about a guy you're bringing back on the practice squad. So
you're not exactly saying that about agreeable people. Usually I wish him well. That's usually, usually an ironic opposite kind of comment.
There was a little more to that. I said, I thought Parker really improved from the spring to the summer. And I think just the entire body of work, we felt like Indy was going to be our kicker. Again, I appreciate Parker's competitiveness and how he worked, and I wish him well. Those are always difficult decisions. And again, we'll do everything we can to support Andy, blah, blah, blah. So I wish him well is a little,
that's we're ripping that out of context. If he literally just went, I wish him well, that wouldn't have been, that wouldn't have sounded good.
But that doesn't sound like a guy he plans on bringing back on the practice squad, was my point, the way he's talking about Parker Romo there. So, those were a couple other reactions to me. Swinson, the kicker situation, strange. Anybody else stand out to you?
Well, no, I wasn't surprised at all about the kicker part. I was saying all along. Again, like I get it. I'm not a true like Patriots insider. I don't report anything. But if people were listening to me on this very podcast, they would have known all along that Borregales was going to be the kicker because they drafted him. And I get that Parker Romo, maybe you could make the case that he had a better overall summer. But all he could really do was push him as hard as he could. I'm not sure the Patriots expected Romo to push as hard as he could for that job, but I think this is basically preordained that as long as Borregales wasn't a disaster, that he was going to be the kicker. And so that didn't surprise me. Who are the other ones? Sorry, who was the first one?
Swinson and Strange were the other two.
Swinson was okay. Though Swinson, that was surprising to me. I know that he didn't really rise up the depth chart. He was basically a third stringer all camp, but he always struck me as a guy that they were going to be patient with and developing it. So I guess that sort of still holds true. The fact that they were able to sneak him through waivers and bring him back on the practice squad. I guess like the fact that he fell in the draft was a sign that people weren't exactly going to be jumping at him off of waivers. And so I'm glad that he came back and he's going to be given more time to develop. I thought he had some occasional flashes in practice, but just never really showed out in the preseason. And, the starting guys that they brought in on the edge, Landry, Caleb on Chason. I know Keon White sort of cooled off as camp went on, but as a third edge rusher, like I felt like he still belonged on the team. And so Swinson is a guy that like can sort of develop in the background. And so you hope he sort of turns into something, and maybe they have to elevate him at some point during the season with injuries or things like that. So I'm glad they're staying the course with Swinson. And Cole Strange, that was a guy that started camp as the starting left guard, but I guess maybe that was sort of by default as like an incumbent that's been around a few years.
Remember, it looked like it was going to be Wes Schweitzer who retired at the end of the spring.
Yeah, I didn't buy the Schweitzer stuff. I smelled a rat with that one from the get-go, but like the fact that Cole Strange was starting, like I was still holding out hope. I was like, all right, maybe he can finally figure it out here. former first-round pick. McDaniels is back. They got Doug Marrone. Like, maybe they can figure out how to get the most out of him, but he just went backwards. And Jared Wilson sort of ascended to that role. I don't think that was the plan. I think Jared Wilson, they want to play center eventually. But he's the left guard for now, and he was obviously better than Strange, whether it was individual drills or team drills. And now he went to Cleveland, where it feels like he could be a better fit for that scheme with Kevin Stefanski. And so maybe I give him a chance to still, play in the NFL. But obviously a bust here. And yeah, I sort of thought the proverbial writing was on the wall. Just another. This is really the running theme that like they're going with their guys as much as they can. And so that extends to rookies and draft picks like Jared Wilson over a guy like Cole Strange. So the Swinson one was the one that sort of surprised me, but the other moves that we're talking about, those didn't surprise me.
I saw, I think it was Doug Hyde noted that the Cleveland Browns practice squad has more 2022 Patriots draft picks on it than the Patriots roster. What draft was Zappy? Because they have Zappy too.
22 was Zappy. That one's everybody's gone except Marcus Jones.
And that was Strange too, right? Strange and Zappy were the same draft?
Yeah.
Okay, so two anyway. Let's get to the moves. It's not. Let's get to the moves they made today. 2 waiver claims. You've probably heard at this point, Tommy Cutlets, Tommy DeVito coming to New England. He will join. So these guys are on the active roster. These are not practice squad signings. You claim somebody on the active roster, or you claim somebody on waivers, they go to the active roster, and you cannot, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks. You cannot waive them. You can put them on IR if they get hurt, but you can't like claim somebody you're 53 and then just stash them on the practice squad. There's a few number of weeks they have to be on your roster. If you cut them, like they're gone. You can't re-add them in any way. So these guys are here. These guys are on the team. Tommy DeVito is one. And then the other one that may have gone a little more under the radar is Charles Woods, who I don't know if he either has the easiest or hardest name to remember because they have 2 defensive backs now. They have Charles Woods and Craig Woodson. And then you also have Charles Woods, which sounds like the Hall of Fame cornerback, Charles Woodson. So a lot of name stuff going on there. Charles Woodson is. Charles Woods went to a couple schools, I think.
Southern
West
Methodist,
Virginia, FMU. Yeah, SMU. So let's start with Tommy Cutlets. The big thing for me with this one, Matt, do they let him compete for QB2? There are some shades here of, if you remember, before Zappy fever got to its peak, remember Zappy was on the practice squad. He almost got the boot from Matt Corral, who was a waiver claim and ended up not making the team. He had some issues personal stuff going on.
Yeah, where's he?
He is tearing it up in the UFL, actually. So shout out.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Good for him.
Give him credit for that. But this is kind of similar where like the backup had a rough preseason and it's different where like obviously Drake May's ahead of where Mac Jones was at that point. But if they're bringing Tommy Cutlets in just to be QB3 and that's what it's going to be, and they just wanted a third arm to run the scout team, I don't know. You could have signed somebody else to the practice squad. If the goal is to bring in competition for Josh Dobbs after a rough summer, I'm in. Like, I think they're similar caliber quarterbacks. Either way, I don't feel great if Drake May gets hurt. But after the summer Dobbs had, and we won't see it. This would all obviously happen behind closed doors. Open up the competition for QB2. And we won't necessarily see that tangibly unless maybe Dobbs becomes the emergency third quarterback one day. I don't hate it. I don't hate bringing in DeVito if it says competition for Dobbs.
No, he should be competition for Dobbs, Barth. He's 26 years old. He played 5 years in college.
Let me say on the other side of that, I don't think he supplants Dobbs right away. Like, I think today he's QB3. It can change, but I still think Josh Dobbs' release is not imminent. I've had some people ask me that. I can't say that for sure. I would be shocked if Josh Dobbs gets cut now. Like, he's still no. They're going to have 3 quarterbacks.
They didn't even hint at Dobbs having a chance of losing the number 2 job throughout camp. So I don't think that's going to change.
Vrabel shot
right
it down.
Now.
He was asked about it.
Not imminently. Like, but like DeVito should be pushing him for the number 2 job. I mean, DeVito's already started 8 games in the NFL. He played 5 years in college. I mean, he had an 85, a career 88 passer rating so far in 8 starts. I mean, like, not that that's anything special, but that's backup material, you know? And so this is a guy that, like, he has some experience. He's been in the NFL a couple years. Like, he should be able to push for a backup job. And like, just the fact, and I think that also goes with, how we've watched Dobbs play throughout the summer. Like the way Dobbs has played, he hasn't looked like he should have that job on lockdown, the backup quarterback job. So no, this should be almost like an internal competition as, the season progresses. Like, I think they should give DeVito a chance to, compete for those snaps. Like, I think it would be fine to have three quarterbacks if they didn't want to cut Dobbs, but DeVito should have a legitimate shot at passing him on the depth chart. He absolutely should.
The other guy they claimed, Charles Woods, exactly the kind of defensive back I was looking for them to claim. Real tweener, primarily a slot corner, but can play some on the boundary, can play a little safety. I think they're thin at corner, especially if Gonzalez is banged up, and he was not at practice. Well, he was at practice day, but he wasn't in uniform. At safety, they keep Duggar and Pettis. There's a little more depth there than I thought, but I don't know that, like, those are guys they could still move on from here. So just a guy that you can plug in wherever you need in the secondary, grab some snaps, will probably play some special teams as well. Second-year player out of SMU, spent last year with the Rams. I think he only played in 1 or 2 games. I'm not expecting anything major from Charles Woods. I don't think he's supplanting anybody on the depth chart. I just think they were a player short at a couple spots, and he looks like a guy that can play multiple spots. So, does he play week 1? I don't know. Might need a week or 2 to get the playbook, but they needed another body there, and the versatility, like, that's what you're looking for this time of year. You're looking for quality depth players. A player that can play a handful of spots is kind of what you want. So, in on Charles Woods, although I know I'm going to butcher his name at times.
I almost went Robert Woods, by the way. Throw in another one that you might butcher.
Bobby Trees.
Former Rams legend Robert Woods, if I'm not mistaken. Who was also at the Rams last year, Barth, was Stretch. So I think this is a John Stryker guy, Charles Woods. Good call. I think this was a John Stryker recommendation is probably what I'm thinking.
And you know what, to tie it together, you know who was with the Giants last year?
Ryan Cowden.
They each got a guy.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that makes sense. I can't believe I didn't even make that connection with Tommy DeVito.
But you made it with Charles Woods.
There. But I was able to make it with Charles Woods and Stretch over there. He played more special teams than defense. He barely even played defense last year. But here, a thinner roster than out in LA, and slot corner is a spot that Marcus Jones didn't necessarily lock down. And I think Marcus Jones is primarily going to be the punt returner for this team. And so if I were to look at a potential, role where Charles Woods could come in and play relatively early on defense, it would be slot corner. I think, as long as they have Gonzalez and Davis, those are your outside corners. Alex Austin's the next man up there. You don't really have a guy that's necessarily locking it down on the inside. And so I would expect Charles Woods to sort of push Marcus Jones for snaps there. But definitely on special teams too.
I was going to say, Woods a little more big and physical too, which just seems like they kind of want from that slot role. They've played Alex Austin there at times. So I think a little more of a scheme fit than Marcus Jones.
Yeah, he can play press, right? So I don't think Jones has ever really been a guy fit for that type of role. But I do like that pickup as a versatile guy in a slot corner, a spot that they really didn't have. They had questions there. And then special teams coverage, I feel like there's questions there now that Javon Baker, is going to be on the practice squad and not necessarily locking down his special teams role there. So they got to figure that out. But I have faith in Jeremy Springer to figure that out, and I have faith in the coaching staff to figure out a role for him because they have good experienced coaches now. This isn't Gerard Mayo, figuring that out. So yeah, I think they'll find a spot for Woods, and I think he'll at least immediately contribute on special teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's the slot corner down the road.
Last thing before we wrap it up here, the Patriots also announced their initial practice squad. Running back Terrell Jennings, wide receiver John Giles, wide receiver Jeremiah Webb, tight end CJ Dupree, G. Scott, offensive lineman Alec Lindstrom, Mekhi Butler, Jack Conley, defensive lineman Jafari Ritzy, David Olajiga, edge rushers Truman Jones and Braden Swinson, linebacker Cam Riley, and cornerbacks Brandon Crossley, Miles Battle, and Kobe Minor. So that's 16. That's full. But David Olajiga has the international pathway eligibility, so they can use that tag on him. He would not count against the total. That essentially leaves him with one open spot on the practice squad. Is that Javon Baker coming back? Is it somebody else? We'll see. Probably not going to be a quarterback now that they have DeVito. Just your thoughts on the practice squad. Anybody you're in particular glad they kept around? Surprised they didn't keep around? Guys who maybe, would be quick to the roster. We'll get some of those early elevations, might get an early roster spot. Just anything from that group stand out to you?
Well, yeah, I'm glad they brought Swinson back, as I was saying before. So I'm glad that they stayed the course there. A guy that I would keep an eye on, just looking at the practice squad here, is G. Scott Jr., the tight end. I thought he made a surprising amount of plays. I know playing most, mainly with the backups in camp, but he feels like a guy that can, he can be a little explosive with some burst after the catch anyway, as long as he can get open and catch the ball. So I mean, I'm not convinced that Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper are going to be healthy the whole season. So does G. Scott come up and make an impact at some point in the season? That's a guy to watch. I think the guy with the best chance to be elevated and actually make an impact is Truman Jones, the edge rusher. I thought he had a real chance to make the 53. Elijah Ponder was the end of the roster edge rusher that made it over him, but he made some plays. He flashed in camp. So I wouldn't be surprised if he came up relatively soon. And so those are two guys that I'm looking forward to potentially actually come up and make an actual impact as elevations from the practice squad. And hopefully Swinson can turn into something down the road.
Yeah, those are good names. I think Truman Jones definitely at the top of that list. You look at, potential elevations right away added to the roster. Keeping both tight ends, G. Scott and CJ Dupree. You have a blocker, you have a pass catcher. I won't be surprised if we see both of those guys at points. Jack Conley, I think, was a good keep. I don't know how much we see him, but he plays 4 spots on the offensive line, like having that flexibility. Yeah. The other guy, I'm glad they kept, and I do wonder if we see at some point, and I know after keeping 8 receivers, it's down to 6, but 8. I wonder if we see Jeremiah Webb. Not as a receiver. Hopefully not as a receiver. Hopefully their depth doesn't take that much of a hit. But he really showed up as a kick returner in the preseason, kick and punt returner. And if they need a spark from the kick return unit, because again, we know that's going to be more important than it's been in a while with the new rules, or if Marcus Jones gets hurt, they need another punt returner. I'd give Jeremiah Webb a look. I liked what I saw from him in the spring. It wasn't enough. You're not going to roster a backup kick returner. It wasn't enough to put him on the 53, but again, somebody's banged up, your returner short, game day elevation, Jeremiah Webb, let him return kicks. I could see it. So I just, maybe that's a down the road thing, but I do wonder if he ends up somehow, some way making an appearance or two for this team this year. So that's the practice squad. We'll see. Mike Vrabel did say there's going to be more moves in the coming days, so it may not stay this way. Watch, I've said this. They'll cut Jeremiah Webb tomorrow for somebody else. But that's the roster. That's 53-man roster. That's the practice squad. Matt and I have more reactions on 98.5thesportshub.com. Matt has more reactions. I've been running around like crazy all day between Catch 22, availability, but I will have reactions coming on 98.5 The Sports Hub. Our next podcast will be a fun one. Our next podcast won't be a podcast at all. It'll be a radio show.
Yes.
The 4th annual?
Well, we did it with Joe Murray one year.
We did the one with Joe. Was that 21? That was at the old building.
We did it at the old building?
We did one at the old building. That was the one with Joe.
Wow.
4th or 5th? I don't know.
I feel like this is the 5th one. Maybe we might be able to go back and check that.
We'll go back and check. We'll know by Monday night. But anyway, as we do Labor Day, 6 o'clock Labor Day evening, Matt and I have done a full Patriots season preview, 2 hours, 6 to 8 on the Sports Hub. We'll post it as a podcast as well. But join us live, won't you? You can call in 617-779-0985. So we'll talk to you then. That will be our season preview. That'll also kind of be the, game preview, starting to get into the Raiders there. In the meantime, for more episodes of this show, subscribe to the Sports Hub YouTube page or the Patriots Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can always check out more on 98.5thesportshub.com. So until Monday night, for Matt Dolloff, I'm Alex Barth. Thanks for tuning in, and talk to you Labor Day. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.